whakaene, which takes us then to item 8, which is the Auckland Water Strategy Framework, and a very significant piece of work that's coming to us today. I'm going to hand straight over to the presenters. Before I do that, I'm just going to advise members what you can see on the screen, that you can see those, that is the recommendations that are in the agenda. And the changes are just what was intended to be in the recommendations from officers, but was an info council managed to drop them off. So it does reflect the report. This isn't any changes that I've made as a chair's recommendation. It's just really a correction to the agenda report, just so everybody can know why that's highlighted in red. So we're all very familiar with our lead strategist, Toby Shepherd, who's going to be taking us through a presentation of about 10 to 15 minutes. And he's joined by Georgie Hart, Greer Lees, and Jacques Victor. And I'm sure, Toby, you will introduce anybody else who's supported this kaupapa. It has been a very big bit of work. So let's go through the presentation, and we'll have pārtai at the end of the presentation. Kia ora, Toby, over to you.
Kia ora, Councillor Kuhn, thank you for that. Morena koutou. I'll just now present and just check that I've got that running before I launch into my 10 minutes. Can everybody see? I'm just trying to make it full screen now. There we go. Awesome. Morena koutou, tēnā kōrua, our chair for today, Chair Kuhn and our Chair Hills. Just acknowledge the councillors, the IMSB members, and I think we also have Nicola McDonald, Chair of the Te Pau Taia, the Environment Subcommittee of the Tāmaki Makaurau Mana Whenua Forum, is also on the call. Members will remember that she attended one of our workshops in advance of today. We also have, as you say, the co-lead of the water strategy. So I'm one of the leads there, and the co-lead, Georgina Hart. And then our leads of the work streams are also on the call. So just to acknowledge Greer Lees from our infrastructure strategy team, Simon Fraser and Brendan Judd from our natural environment strategy team, Jacob Otter, who's from Rimu in our strategy department, and our other supporting staff online today. I might be the one to present, but it takes a lot of people to deliver content like this. And there's a lot of work that's gone into that. So I thank them for their work, and I'm really pleased to be able to reach this milestone today. What is today? Members have a paper and an appendix. In the appendix, I'll just flip through to the next slide here, so today's presentation. So members have a committee paper and an appendix. In the appendix is what we've called the core content of the water strategy. So this is the core content that reflects the workshopped material that we've workshopped with the ENCC over the last few months. Today we are recommending it be endorsed as the core content of the water strategy. And then what staff would do is take that core content, make any revisions or refinements that are required to get that kind of ready to be public facing. And so those are the resolutions that you'll see at the end of today's presentation, and we'll touch on those. So my job is to give you a brief background, a summary of that key content, speak to those next steps, and then take a look at the recommended resolutions together. The next slide just shows us our timeline. So the water strategy, these are the last timeline for the development of all strategy, beginning of course with the Section 17A Value for Money review that recommended a 3 water strategy be developed before the scope of that strategy was enlarged as part of the public discussion document that went out for consultation in early 2019. Just a reminder on this timeline that we adopted as a council some consumption reduction targets earlier this year, and we were able to embed those actions across the council group, including in policy work programs and into the long-term plan in order to reach those 2030 and 2050 consumption reduction targets. So already we saw there a focus on water consumption in the water strategy work, and an achievement there, and then work against those targets is underway. And then the milestone there, or on our timeline, we've developed the strategy throughout the year, and we've held a number of workshops with the Environment and Climate Change Committee, with local board chairs invited to attend also. And it's those workshops that have guided and shaped the content in the paper, the appendix, and the presentation that you see here today. So highlighted in yellow on this timeline is the core content. That's where we are, with its 8 strategic shifts to achieve that vision for the water strategy. Te Mauri o Te Wai, the life-sustaining capacity of water is protected and enhanced. And then following today, if that core content is adopted, staff would return with a final water strategy document early next year. The next slide just gives us a brief overview of the context for the strategy's development, in addition to that timeline that we just took a look at. So when we think about the strategy, we need to remember it's a 30-year strategy for Auckland Council, designed to direct investment and activity across the council group. In the near term, we pay particular attention to direction from central government, and you can see some core pieces of our context there on the screen in front of you. Spatial planning, the essential freshwater package, that includes that national policy statement on freshwater management that we've discussed at length in workshops, the central government's water reform and resource management reform in particular. And staff have considered that direction from central government to deliver management of freshwater land use and development, I should say, in catchments in an integrated way. And we've carried that through into the strategic direction within the strategy. And then we've also considered, over the life of the strategy, you have a persistent context of land use change and population growth, that need for intergenerational infrastructure investment, the twin challenge of mitigating and accounting and adapting to climate change, the growth of iwi capacity, further settlements over time, and that increasing direction from central government towards partnership approaches, and technological change over the period of the strategy, remembering, of course, that we're talking about 30 years here. So that's the context with which we've approached the content you see for the strategy. The next slide, this is a simplified diagram, just to remind councillors, where does the Auckland Water Strategy sit within our framework at council, and sort of what's its purpose going forward. So at the left-hand side of this diagram, the Auckland Plan 2050, the sort of paramount long-term strategic document at Auckland Council. The Auckland Water Strategy sits inside that context and responds to the strategic direction within the Auckland Plan. And then the Auckland Water Strategy directs many of the things, and this is there's a high-level summary here in the yellow arrows that you can see there, many of the ways that council invests and undertakes activity across the group, remembering it's a group strategy. So the water strategy would direct and provide direction to the CCOs, to our infrastructure strategy and our asset management plans, to the long-term plan, to how the group thinks about spatial planning, to the unitary plan, and then of course to council work programs. And what we've done on the next slide is just provide an example of that, drawing on the example of the consumption targets that were adopted in April this year, and just trying to give councillors a sense of what it looks like to have a water strategy in practice. So with the consumption targets that were adopted, we've been able to then direct a number of processes and embed a number of actions into the way that the council group approaches that issue. So those consumption targets, you'll see on the right-hand side in the blue boxes, they were reflected in the water care statement of intent. There's smart meter investment and leakage investment in the long-term plan. The inside the unitary plan and group work programs, we are working on rain tank policy work and retention tank policy work, looking at making that the way that we approach new builds in Auckland. So just an example of how this directs the council group. On the next slide, you'll see the strategy framework that we have workshopped through September, November this year. So this is the water strategy on a page. The vision at the top there again, Te Mauri o Te Wai o Tāmaki Makaurau, the life-sustaining capacity of Auckland's water is protected and enhanced. And I'll just draw your attention as we go through each of these sections briefly, through the vision, the treaty context, overarching challenges, cross-cutting themes, strategic shifts, and implementation. Just draw your attention to how we've finalised that treaty context within the framework. So most recently at our last workshop last week on Wednesday, we were discussing as a group how to accommodate feedback through our mana whenua engagement in particular, that the treaty partnership be made foundational to the way that council approaches water going forward. And then there was also the discussion around retaining the integrity of the Te Tiriti partnership strategic shift down there in the strategic shift section, and its actions, so that we can see progression of that shift and the remaining 7 shifts that make up the 8 within the strategy itself. So what we've done is we've included in the core text of the strategy inside your appendix a description of that treaty context, and put it there beneath the vision of the water strategy within our framework. And then we've retained the Te Tiriti partnership shift as described in the appendix, and in keeping with the way that we've workshopped that content together. So just drawing your attention to that final approach that we've landed on here in the framework for members as a result of our discussion last week. So the next slide here we'll look at each of the strategic shifts in turn. So you can see, just before I do take us to that slide, you can see that the that the strategy framework that we're looking at presents 8 strategic shifts. These are designed to address the overarching challenges on the screen there, protecting and enhancing the health of water bodies and their ecosystems, delivering 3 water services at the right time, in the right place, at the right scale as the city grows, having enough water for people now and in the future, reducing flood and coastal inundation risk over time, improving how the council works with its treaty partners, and improving how the council organises itself to deliver against those challenges. The strategic shifts also take into account the cross-cutting themes that you see there in the framework, so that dual challenge of mitigating and adapting to the impacts of climate change, and equity and affordability, also present within the way that we think about the aims and the actions for the strategic shifts that are detailed within the appendix. So, and of course, underpinning the strategy framework is implementation, so coordination, capacity, and capability across the council group to deliver on the strategy. The next slide is just a nice way of presenting those 8 shifts. So just to go through those shifts very briefly by touching on their aims. So the first shift, Te Tiriti partnership. Remember here we're describing, with each of these shifts, we're describing a movement of council processes, aims, and the way we go about tackling problems as a group. And we're describing a shift over time with an aim in mind. So the aim for the Te Tiriti partnership shift is that council and mana whenua are partners in the protection, management, and enhancement of water. The next shift, empowering Aucklanders, is that Aucklanders are empowered to shape decisions and are prepared for our changing water future. The next shift, regenerating water infrastructure. Regenerative infrastructure systems enhance the life-sustaining capacity of water, or MODI, tying back to our vision there. Our next shift, sustainable allocation and equitable access. When the council allocates water from the natural environment, water use is sustainable and considers the health and well-being of ecosystems and people. The next shift there, water security. Auckland captures, uses, and recycles water efficiently so that everyone has access to enough water of the appropriate quality to meet their needs. We also have a shift for the integration of land use and water planning. And so this is about water and its life-sustaining capacity as a central principle in land management and planning decisions, both regulatory and non-regulatory, when we think about the integration of land use and water. We have another shift, restoring and enhancing water ecosystems. Auckland, the aim of the shift is that Auckland has a thriving and sustainable natural water ecosystems that support life, food gathering, and recreation. And the final shift in the centre there on this diagram is pooling knowledge. So that's about Auckland having the knowledge about water that it needs to make good. Oh, I'm just getting a bit of feedback there. There we go. Auckland has the knowledge about water that it needs to make good quality, timely, and strategic decisions about water. And they're presented in this kind of lattice framework just to show that they are each reinforcing and they've been thought about as an integrated package. So when we see the water strategy in practice, what changes will we see? We'll see empowered Aucklanders, engaged and water literate. We'll see greater access to blue-green spaces and over time an increasing ability to gather food and recreate in water. A stronger partnership approach with mana whenua, decisions that prioritise water ecosystem well-being, MODI, and in time an improving ecosystem health. Enhanced role of water in placemaking, so that's that water sensitive concept that we've been discussing, and greater water efficiency across the region, harking back to those targets that we touched on a few slides earlier. So this next slide is really the last main slide that we have for today. So councillors have seen a version of this slide in the workshop. This is our summary of the actions within the strategy. So there are something like 70 actions within the strategy, and inside the appendix that you've received, this represents maybe 20, 25 of those actions and tries to describe the milestones that we expect through implementation. So we've structured them from left to right, year 1, year 2 to sort of 4, and then from 4 onwards. What we've tried to do here is show that, for example, the benchmarking, the per capita water efficiency target, and the investing against that per capita water efficiency target, we've structured those, we've made progress on those, and we've kind of ticked those off in year 1 over there on the left-hand side in the dark blue. With the lighter blue, we're trying to show here that for things like the essential freshwater package implementation, you'll see a long bar that's underway now. So we're underway now in year 1, but we've got a 3-year period there to deliver the MPSFM plan change in 2024. And then you'll see for those really long yellow bars, we're signalling, for example, with the climate scenario modelling, there's modelling underway now, year 1, but that needs to evolve and persist in the way that it guides our planning over time. So those ones are some more ongoing milestones, if you like. If I just draw out a couple, to remind the group of some of the core milestones in this implementation timeline. I've touched on the benchmarking, and so this is our dual approach that will aid shared understanding between the council, mana whenua, and the broader public of those outcomes that we're seeking for water. And just a reminder that we're partnering with the forum through this project and Te Pou Tai Ao to develop that Mātauranga-led framework in order to achieve that dual framework approach. And I've touched on those targets there. I've also spoken there to the essential freshwater package, and perhaps to draw out the MODI indicators, the expanded monitoring program, and opportunities for mana whenua-led monitoring there. So that's about partnering with mana whenua to understand new indicators as required by central government direction, and then looking for opportunities to have mana whenua lead those monitoring programs. Maybe just finally on the right-hand side, to call out some actions in years 4 to 10. So you can see that There are catchment-based approaches to the way that we think about water ecosystem well-being and the regulatory and non-regulatory responses there, and optimized freshwater investment framework as well. And those are some examples that build on milestones in earlier years, things like our frameworks for understanding indicators and setting targets and so on. So this is just an overview slide showing us what some of those key milestones are for the water strategy. The last slide I have here, just to close up, is these are our next steps. So today we have presented the core content in the appendix, as I mentioned. If that's endorsed today, staff would go away, refine that content, and return in the new year with a final worked up water strategy document. And we are signalling here some supporting documents, an implementation approach. We'd look to publish the international benchmarking results. We have some case study literature as well that would support the Auckland water, it would support understanding of the concepts inside the water strategy. So we'd look to bring those to you in the new year. My final slide, Chair Coombe, is the recommended resolutions. So these just reflect the resolutions that you have signalled to the committee have been updated, that weren't captured in the final Info Council report. So, and these reflect the body of the text of the paper. So the first resolution is about adopting the framework, consisting of the vision, the treaty context, challenges, cross-cutting themes, the strategic shifts and their associated aims and actions, and then implementation. So A is just adopt the framework. B is endorsing that core content. So the aims, context, and actions related to each strategic shift as set out in Appendix A as the core content of the water strategy. And C is just noting that the actions related to each strategic shift might require that further refinement, and that the core content requires the editing appropriate for an external facing document. And so we would bring that to committee for consideration and adoption as part of the final water strategy document in the first half of next year. And just to note there, and this is in the paper as well, there would be a workshop with this committee ahead of that final document. So you'd get a chance to workshop that content before it comes back to committee. And with that, it's just a big thank you from me. And perhaps just before I hand back and open for questions, just to take a brief moment to acknowledge that it is quite a milestone presenting this content, and just to celebrate the leads and all of the staff that have been involved across the council group in reaching this milestone in some trying circumstances in the last few months. So just to acknowledge them. So kia ora, that's our presentation, and really welcome some questions. Thank you.
Ngā mihi kia koe, Toby, moto kōrero. Thank you for your presentation. And just also want to welcome Nicola McDonald, who joined us during the presentation. Haere mai e hoa. Thank you for being here, wearing your poutai as chair of Te Pou Taiao for the Mana Whenua Forum. It's great that you've been able to join us and support this kaupapa. So we're now, just Suad, if you could bring the resolutions up, the recommendations up, please, Suad. Just want to see them. I'd just like to get them on the table just before we open for Pātai. I'm very happy to move these recommendations, and we've got Councillor Linda Cooper. Were you wanting to second?
Yes, second. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So as Toby explained, this is what's reflected in the report and what we have workshopped through. So I'll now open it for. So I'm just going to get the right screen so I can see the speaking order for the Pātai. The first question is Councillor Walker. Kia ora, Wayne.
Sure. Kia ora, Pippa. Is it possible to see that slide. I think it was the How We Get There slide that had the various years, sequence of implementation, if you like.
Absolutely. I prematurely ducked out of that presentation, Councillor Walker, so I'll just bring that up for us again.
You're the main man, Toby. We can't have you ducking out.
Oh, I just mean stop the presentation there. Sorry, I'm just struggling now to relocate it. It's on its way. Oh dear. I'm not sure what's happening. There we go. This should be it. Wonderful. There we are. I'll make that a little larger for you, Councillor.
Yeah,
sorry.
Great. Great. So, really, commendations on the Strategy First team. I mean, really good work. I guess just focusing on how we get there. One of the and I'll just make some comments, but effectively they're questions. Under year one and early on, one of the critical things we've got to do, and this is part of a piece of work that Matthew Blakey is leading, and that's around carbon measurement. That's really critical across a whole range of things. There's a tool being developed for that will be applicable in the water space. And the rationale for that is we've got an immediate requirement to lower our emissions. Now, the other concern that I've got in that respect is quite a few of these milestones and the like are really, from my perspective, really too far out. I'd suggest that in the water space, there's a great deal that we can do that isn't necessarily resource constrained, is not necessarily financially constrained, generates an incredibly fast return on investment and a rapid response in terms of reducing emissions. So I guess the concern I've got is that we don't lock ourselves in to these milestones. We've got to reduce emissions significantly by 2030. That's not far off at all. And I would suggest that there's a requirement for us to do everything in many respects, and a number of the things that will be occurring in the private space where individuals will make decisions. They would like to see some leadership and incentivisation from council. So I do have a significant question around how we get their key milestones.
So can we ask that as a question then,
so
please,
I'm asking
Councillor?
that as a question. Do we need to have as defined an approach as that by year, for example?
Over to you, Toby.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thanks for that question. I'll have a go and then let me know if I can add any more detail. When I look at this slide, I mean, there's one thing to keep in mind is that there is quite a lot of other actions that are not shown on the slide. You know, for sort of a summary and brevity, we've kind of captured what we think are kind of the core ones to put up on the slide. So I just really encourage you to take a look through the appendix for where all of the actions are. The bulk of the actions have been identified as years 1 to 3, simply because they are in that near term, and we can structure them into work programs once if they are to be endorsed. So we really do see a focus on near-term delivery and really embedding them into council processes as soon as possible. Yeah, so I suppose that's how I'd answer that first question around getting specific about delivery, and then perhaps just to add that we find it's really important, as I'm sure you know, within the council frameworks, to be really clear about when those actions are required to be delivered, so that we can have that kind of wraparound accountability for delivery and kind of reporting and monitoring and checking that we are actually delivering what we say we will in the strategies like this. So we have been specific. And we've had a focus on years 1 to 3 as much as is reasonable.
Sure. Yeah. I understand where
you're
coming from. If I identify just a couple of examples.
Sorry, Councillor, can you ask You can
So by way of
hold that for your comments, but could you
by
just...
way of question, can we not adopt a catchment-based approach immediately? Can we commence work on a smart water supply network immediately? Obviously, those things will be done in a stepwise fashion. I'm happy to engage after the event today, Madam Chair, but I'm just putting up that a very flexible dynamic approach is required. The other suggestion that I'd put, Toby, did you want to make a comment?
Sorry, Councillor. Just to make a comment there. So with respect to the two examples that you've outlined there, the catchment-based approaches and the smart water supply network. So in the case of the first, it's really a realisation of many changes that need to take place in years 1 to 3. So, for example, in the catchment-based approaches, council really needs to look at building a council group knowledge management plan, so the way that we think about information and data and how it flows around the group. That's a key part of that catchment-based approach, as is the delivery of the plan change for the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management, which then gives us that kind of spatial arrangement of freshwater management units, which would support and kind of integrate with the catchment management approach. So that's a case of sort of little milestones along the way, building up to the catchment-based approach. And so you'll see the knowledge management plan or knowledge management framework and the essential freshwater package with the NPSFM. They're both there as the light blue, kind of years 1 to 3. And then with respect to the smart water network, it's sort of a similar story. We've adopted the targets in April this year, those water consumption reduction targets. We will deliver a key component of that smart water supply network are those smart meters. And Council now has a program through Watercare to deliver, I think it's 44,000 a year now. And that'll take us sort of 10 or 12 years to roll those out to all connections in Auckland, just providing Aucklanders with greater information about how they're using water, and then obviously providing the water service entity, Watercare, with that greater insight into how water's being used. And so it's represented here as sort of realising that smart water supply network towards the end of that rollout period, if you like.
Sure.
But I think that the great point you're making in there, and perhaps I'm hearing there for the smart water supply network, is that after a few years, you do have something like 100,000 or so houses. You are beginning to build out those insights. So it's very
sure.
So Councillor Walker, also can I just a clarification that might help if we ask Toby, if I might just jump in here, is that this is still going to be developed further in terms of what's in Appendix A. So is that another opportunity, Toby, for looking at the timing of the milestones when it goes through further evaluation?
That's right. And I think making it quite a bit clearer what's envisaged on something like this, and at what time we would see what change and so on. Yes, absolutely. And so we allowed for that.
A couple of other quick questions, Madam Chair.
Can you keep it very quick, please?
Yes,
Councillor?
I'll be as quick as I can. I don't need a long answer. We've got an immediate requirement to generate some exemplars. They will test things out in terms of blocks and opportunities, and there are a range of things that we could be doing there. So I just want to put that up as something immediate. The other question that I've got, Madam Chair, is that this strategy is an exemplar for other councils in New Zealand. I would suggest that there is some immediacy on our part to put it out there to other councils who may be interested in fast-tracking, customising things for themselves. If we've got a little bit of resource that we can allocate to that, that would be great. So welcome to respond very quickly on those two questions, Toby.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, over to you, Toby.
Just to say, looking at the case studies report, obviously there'll be pilots underway as a result of the strategy, and in fact some pilots are underway now across many of the areas of the strategy. And then, just to support the connection with other councils, we have a couple of conversations with neighbouring councils underway already. We just kind of keep them abreast of our development, and we would do that as part of a normal course of sort of finalising something like this. So support those comments and happy to action those.
Kia ora, Toby, and thank you, Councillor Walker, for your enthusiasm for the water strategy, and I look forward to your comments too, if you wish. Ko te pātai whakene, nā Councillor Dalton. Kia ora, Angela, your question.
Kia ora, Chair. Kia ora, tēnā koe, Toby. And thank you to you and all of the team that have worked on this. It's certainly been an interesting journey in the workshops. I just wonder if you could explain or just clarify for me again the fit for this into Three Waters when the Three Waters model is implemented in terms of Council's role, the accountability for the outcomes. How does it fit? How may it possibly change?
Kia ora, Councillor Dalton, through the chair. Thank you for that question. Yeah, so obviously the water strategy under development this year developed during a period of significant uncertainty for the council group, and now with the government, the central government, indicating that participation in Three Waters reform will be mandated. We're obviously getting a little bit of clarity, but there's quite a lot that's still to be worked out. So I suppose the first thing to say is not all elements of the proposed structure, in terms of what functions and roles might end up in a new entity and what council would still retain in order to perform its statutory duties. We don't have clarity over all elements of the reform. The case in point being the Mayor's membership on the group to continue working through what arrangements and structures would look like. I just add that council would retain its role and many of its core roles as environmental regulator, regulatory planning authority. There's that treaty partnership role for local government, council's role to engage and be the voice of Auckland communities, and then council group's own kind of water consumption and so on. In terms of the strategy itself, when we think about possible reform and its relationship to the entity, as currently proposed, there isn't a mechanism that would see the entity give effect to this strategy were the council to adopt a final strategy in the new year. There's not a mechanism within the current proposal by the central government that would see the entity give effect to that strategy. Obviously, that proposal is not finalised, and it would be, I think, council's position here that the water strategy would provide guidance both to the transition period, and we would be using the water strategy as council's position in the outcomes that are sought from any new entity. So I suppose it's a two-part answer. The first is that a lot of the functions and services and activities that we're talking about in the water strategy are retained by Auckland Council, and the water strategy would then direct those. And then the second part of that is, should reform eventuate, a new entity be formed, I think council is very much looking at how we find ways to have that entity give effect to the strategy, but just that clarity that at the moment in the current proposal, there isn't a mechanism. Is that helpful? And I'm happy either to provide more context, or I know that Megan Tyler is also on the call and may have something additional to add to that.
I guess it sounds like there's still a little way to go before we get the clarity on the accountabilities and who will be responsible. So happy with that certain of uncertainty answer. Chair, I have two more questions. What's my second one? Within this strategy, through the drought, we talked about an alternative water source. Does this sit within your strategy? I can see where it can, or is that a water care issue?
So I suppose probably the first way that I would answer that is that with the water strategy and thinking about the strategic direction over time, there's a target in there around, we put a figure against water that is captured for non-potable use. What we're trying to deliver is a water strategy that directs Auckland to be more water sensitive. And so we're trying to change from a single source approach to the way that Auckland meets its supply needs over time. And so inside the strategy, you'll see a strong push responding to public feedback and expectations for rain tanks and that kind of local capture and local use of water. And you'll see targets set for rainwater capture and recycled water over time. So there is that element of meeting Auckland's needs through a diverse set of sources and achieving water security through local capture, rooftops and so on. And then I'm also conscious of Watercare's application through the Board of Inquiry to the Waikato Awa, which is progressing and expecting a decision, I believe, in sort of mid-January now, on that consent application for the water that has been sought by Watercare as it's identified the Waikato as its kind of next major source. So it's kind of a two-part answer there again. Water strategy is envisaging a water security approach that is diversifying and thinking about rainwater capture and capture on site and use on site. And then you also have the BOI in play and the consent for that water from the river as part of the long-term strategy to water security.
I understand. So perhaps any alternative source outside of taking more water is probably in Watercare's work program. My last question. My experience is that we can often adopt strategies, plans, policies without a budget attached, and that sets us up for failure, almost writing a cheque that we can't cash. When you present the strategy to be adopted, will it come with a corresponding budget to implement it? Well, a proposal for a budget.
Yeah, great question, Councillor Dalton. So the way that we have approached a strategy such as this, so when you're thinking about a 30-year time frame, but there is a focus on the near term, those years 1 to 3. For many of those years 1 to 3 actions, we don't envisage new spend. We envisage that providing clear direction will improve current processes, so no sort of new spend required. Or we envisage that the direction in the water strategy will redirect current spending to higher priority activity that's more aligned with the strategic direction. There is a third bucket, though, which would be about new spend, and particularly when we think about infrastructure and large projects, that would need to come through council's annual budget and long-term plan processes. So remembering back to the slide, I wonder if can I navigate to it? Let me see. There was this slide here. So just like as an example of the role that the Auckland Water Strategy plays, so it's setting clear direction, and it is obligating council through the long-term plan, through the asset management plans, its infrastructure strategy, and the way that CCOs are directed and so on, council work programs. It is obligating them to implement that strategic direction. But we need to remember that there are budget decisions that are made through each of those processes that balance the financial constraints of the time and what's possible in a given work program and so on. So in short, the strategy when it's presented next year won't come with a budget attached to it. It'll acknowledge that some actions are no new spend, some actions are redirection of spend, some over time will require new decision making that will carry new spend with it, but it'll be through those processes, such as the long-term plan and so on. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Ngā mihi nui, Toby. Tēnā koe, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you.
Ngā mihi kia koe, Councillor Dalton, for your questions. Ko te pātai whai ake nei nā Member Wilson. Tēnā koe, Karen.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Aroha mai, I'm unable to work my video, so won't be able to see me. Maybe that's a good thing. First off, I would just acknowledge Chair Te Pautaia of the Manawhenua Forum, Nicola MacDonald. Good to see you there. Toby, I would just like to say I note your comments around it being very difficult, and I acknowledge absolutely it has been difficult for you and the team. It's not an easy one, this strategy, especially with the significance that Manawhenua place on he wai, the water. So what I wanted to say, I think, in listening to Councillor Walker's kōrero around exemplar, in terms of the strategy, it's almost an exemplar model for engagement with mana whenua. And I think that is a real bonus. I acknowledge absolutely, especially in the last week, the work that has been carried out with your team in trying to make this almost the final proposed piece of work. I acknowledge the work that you've been completing with the chair of Te Pautaiao, Nicola MacDonald, and how that has added to it. So in that sense, where this work, and whether it's this work or Three Waters, reform, what this possesses that not necessarily the Three Waters reform work, is the engagement with mana whenua and the effort that's been put in terms of individual and also across the forum, the mana whenua forum. So that's my first, building on that now to make this, because I said almost exemplar, to make it an exemplar is to continue past the stage where the recommendations would be put in front of us today and ensure that as they talk to budget, there is some resource available to continue the approach that you have used to date with mana whenua across Tāmaki Makaurau. So that's my pātai at the end. The front is just acknowledging the great work that's being done there.
Kia ora, Member Wilson. Yeah, thank you for that acknowledgement. It's been fantastic engaging with mana whenua on the content and working up the strategy. So yeah, really appreciate those comments. Just with regards to your question there around resourcing, I think that's a really good observation and one that we'll consider when we return to the committee. I'm sure you've spotted this as well, and I'll just draw the attention of the committee to, I think it's para 88 in the committee report, just noting that we're intending to return to the Tāmaki Makaurau Mana Whenua Forum to provide another opportunity to feedback on the draft strategy before we return to this committee with that final in the new year. So just signalling some further work there. And then I would just make the connection to many of the actions within the strategy talk to mātauranga Māori knowledge and concepts of Māori. I mean, the vision of the water strategy is the Māori o te wai, the life-sustaining capacity of water, protected and enhanced. And in each case where those concepts and where Māori is referenced, we're really clear in the actions that mana whenua partnership is key, critical, significant to effective delivery of those actions. And so we make provision for partnership in those. And so that's another element of ongoing work that we would be embedding in the implementation of the strategy. So thank you for your comments, and just to make those.
Well done, thank you.
Ngā mihi ki a koe, Karen, o Whakaaro. The next pātai, Councillor Darby. Kia ora, Chris.
Kia ora, Chair, and thank you. Toby, look, you mentioned this is a milestone. It certainly is. It's a major breakthrough. So look, at the outset, I have to say huge acknowledgement to you and all those in the strategy unit that have been supporting you, working with you, everybody involved. Just going to follows on, Toby, from the question line of Councillor Dalton, and I guess I'm, like many, wanting to see implementation now. So when we go to paragraph 56 of your report, I guess I'm sort of interested in what's going to show up through the annual budget. That's the budget that's right in front of us. So when you look at 56, you say you've got an executive lead team water lead. Could you just let us know who that is? I'm just trying to recall. And then on points Roman 2 to 6, just can you give us an idea of what we need to be considering in the annual plan to ensure we get traction on those?
Kia ora, Councillor Darby. Sorry, I'm navigating to the correct paragraph. So I'm at 56. 56I is the ELT water lead. Correct. So that's Megan Tyler, the Chief of Strategy there for Council as the ELT water lead. And sorry, I missed the second half of that question.
So it was just on the balance. So the Chief of Strategy is the water lead as well. So additional work for an already highly worked director. So that concerns me a little bit. I didn't quite get that. But the balance of those Roman 2 through to 6, what do we need to be considering there in the annual plan process? Or is that already addressed in the annual plan process?
I see. Thank you. Sorry to have you repeat that there, Councillor Darby. So as part of the annual plan process, we would be looking at the actions, should they be endorsed today, and reflecting those, any that would need to be appropriately reflected in that plan for you. And we would be bringing that through that annual plan process with reference to the actions that may be endorsed today. So you'll see that through that process. I don't have a comprehensive list of those with me now, and in part that's about working through what would need to show up in that process. Many of the actions inside the first year are in fact underway now, and we're able to accommodate them as part of that horrible sort of business as usual term. So with respect to things like the drought management plan and so on, we are underway with many of those milestones in that first year. So you can expect to see any that need to come through the annual. I'm just navigating back to the milestones for you there. You can expect to see any that need to show up in the annual plan process, but most of these are accommodated already, and then we would look, of course, to embedding implementation into any of the other long-term budget processes that we have here.
Okay, thanks, Chair. It would be good to keep a track of that, Chair, so that we can actually see how we are going. We're in a critical phase of that budget right now, and I'm not really confident that we've seen it in the working up of that budget. So let's keep an eye on that, please.
Ka pai, Councillor Darby, and good points. I think that brings us to the end of questions. Is that right, Suad? I can't see any other pātai.
That is correct.
So he korero a koutou, comments. I can just see at the moment, just have a comment request from Councillor Walker. If there's anybody else, please indicate in the sidebar. So I will hand it over to you, Councillor Walker. Kia ora, Wayne.
Thanks, Pippa. So just again, commendations to the officers around this, and also thanks to the councillors that have supported the development of this strategy, which is certainly something I've been advocating for some time. And there are a number of things that are relevant about the way we've developed this strategy that aren't always applicable elsewhere. So there's some really good learnings. The approach has been more international. So we've worked with water sensitive cities. We've picked up some information from other cities, and I think that has dramatically enhanced what we've come out with, and also the time span of putting this together. We've adopted somewhat of a stepwise approach, which has been useful. So we've worked through it, sequentially. And I think that we've got something that's pretty fit for purpose. My concern is that the implementation needs to be as rapid as possible, that the return on investment in the water space can be really, really fast and drive down emissions significantly, because there's a huge amount of control that individual householders and businesses and so on have in this space. And we really need to be leading that and accelerating it as quickly as we can around cleaner production, around the circular economy, around the resilience, the changes that people and businesses can make to not just save on water, but save on energy, improve the environment, do the right thing. Water is one of the single best areas for behaviour change across Auckland in the climate mitigation space. So I really want to emphasise that. I would hope, Madam Chair, that the approach that we've got going forward is going to be as collaborative as possible, so that even if some of our internal resources are slim, the resources out there in the wider public space, the business space, the community space are significant. And if we can tap into that, to use a figurative expression in the water space, we can really make things go faster. So I'm very much encouraged around what we've got here. As Councillor Darby said, we need to make sure that there's acknowledgement in the budget space for that. And it doesn't have to be a great deal of budget, because in many instances, the return on investment will be in a single year or not too much thereafter for many of the things that we're proposing or might want to do in the implementation space. So now we need to work at speed. So this has been a really good process. I hope that it's picked up by other cities in New Zealand, because there's some real urgency around this. We're the only city or authority in New Zealand that I know of that has got a strategy like this. So it's really great. So thank you very much. Well done.
Ngā mihi kia koe, Councillor Walker. Thank you for your comments. The next comment, e whai ake nei, nā Councillor Hills. Kia ora.
I think Councillor Cooper was next, Chair. Sorry.
Reading back to front. Aroha mai, Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Sorry, somehow I'm trying to do a bit of research around our budgets, but it says I haven't got internet, but I must have because I'm on this call. So I guess I just wanted to make some comments around when we talk about budgets. A lot of the actual levers we're going to use are in the water care budget, of course, which we already signed off in the long-term plan in terms of smart metering for leak detection, things like that. So a lot of that is already embedded in our long-term plan, which is very pleasing. I just wanted to also acknowledge all our staff, but also water care for working collaboratively. And in our CCO review, one of the things that came out of that report, and we've committed to with all our CCOs, is to work closer together. And I think that this has been a really good exercise, and it was a kind of a test of that new way of operating too. Starting this off with our staff from water care and Toby Greer and the team there working through this. And I think that there's been some comments about adding more, but this has been a good process. We've actually got to a point now, we've got something that we can go out with. And I think adding more to it will come from the community. I think we've had our good go at it through many workshops, and now it's time to hear from our community. So thank you, and just commend everybody who's worked on this.
Ngā mihi kia koe, Councillor Cooper, for your korero. So that takes us to Councillor Hills. Kia ora, Richard.
Kia ora, and thank you so much. Thanks, Chair. And yeah, it was a shame that I had to drop off for a few weeks while the most important parts of the strategy were being discussed and implemented. But just want to really acknowledge Toby Greer, Georgie, and the whole team for putting this together in what is quite difficult circumstances while everyone is on Teams or Zoom or Skype. But also really listening to the feedback, especially from Nicola and the team, and Karen and the team, and just the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum and the Independent Māori Statutory Board. I think the feedback from them, especially on water sensitive cities, we thought we knew everything. We thought it would just be easy to sort of implement what they were doing. But the feedback that, Toby came back and said, this is actually not the way we should be doing it. It's very clear we need our own framework It's clear we need, the partnership approach, and to make a water strategy that fits the Tamaki Makaurau context is so much more important than fitting with the world, although you've managed to do both, which is pretty phenomenal. So I think that, despite it being a lot of information, a lot to go, back on in those first workshops, the detail was so important because we've got to where we are now. So just want to acknowledge the team. It's so important. This has been years in the mix, but now we have a strategy that says, prepares us. It's about restoring the mauri of our waterways, which we're doing, but we need to do far, far more in that space. It's about people. It's about preparing our city for a climate change future. Sorry, I've got Theo crying in the background, so I'm a little bit distracted. But I'm just really, really impressed to where we've come from, and to hear Councillor Walker so positive when I know that it's been a frustration for him as well. That's fantastic to hear. So it's great to hear the positive feedback. And I hope that the staff, you feel some pride in what you've created here, because I think that this is a really good strategy for not just the council and water care, but also for Auckland and for everything going forward, that we can look to what do we want for the future of our water, the future of our city, when we have seen pretty concerning things around the drought and water supply, and also what's happening in our waterways. So I think it's really holistic, and I just want to congratulate you, Chair, for carrying this on in my absence and really pushing hard to get it right. And thanks to Councillor Cooper as well for her knowledge through her connection with water care as the liaison. So I just think this has been a well-rounded strategy that I hope everyone will support, because it's pretty obvious it's what we kind of have worked together to achieve. So yeah, I'm just really impressed, and it's just really, really good. So thank you.
Ngā mihi ki a koe, Councillor Hills, Moto Whakaro. I just want to check in before I wrap up that IMSB member Karen, did you want to add a comment further, or did that get covered in your pātai?
Everything covered in my pātai, thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora. If no one else wishes to speak, I would be just delighted to wrap up this item. And in speaking in support, I do also want to add my acknowledgements. I know this body of work started well before I joined the governing body, so I come to this very late. So I do acknowledge all of the founders, the people who put in the mahi over many years. Matua Alf, I know you played a big role in the discussion document, Our Water Future. Ngā mihi for your work and bringing this forward into this term. Councillor Walker, I know your enthusiasm too over many years, and good to hear you speaking so positively about the water strategy. And I'm sure there's many other elected representatives who've really played a part. It's been great to hear about the process being, I think I heard the word exemplary being used there, which is quite phenomenal when it comes to our processes. We're always trying to aim for best practice, but there's lots of moving parts. So I do acknowledge that's all come together with this water strategy. Ngā mihi ki a korua, Nicola and Martin, who are here with us to support this kaupapa and the engagement that's happened with the Mana Whenua Forum. Really appreciate that this has been a positive process, and thank you for those acknowledgements to Member Wilson. We've also had some very thorough and engaging workshops on the water strategy, so I do appreciate everybody who's contributed to this body of work, and of course to the staff and the team. Ngā mihi kia koe, Toby, and to your team, Greer and Georgie, and those who've put in a lot of work. And it's good to hear how collaborative it has been with the water care officials. And thank you, Councillor Cooper, for your liaison with water care. I think what we've heard is just how essential this bit of work is, and thank you for members who've highlighted the urgency of this work around the implementation, the need to align the budget, and it's always very good when we are pushing for things to happen more quickly. And I just, the slide that is in the presentation about the change that we will see if this water strategy is implemented, it really is just a no-brainer in terms of what we're aiming for. This is something that we can all really embrace around empowering Aucklanders, greater access to blue-green spaces, stronger partnership approach with mana whenua, decisions that prioritise water ecosystem well-being, the Māori o Te Wai, water-sensitive urban areas, enhanced role of water in placemaking, and greater water efficiency across the region. And you only have to look at the exemplar project of Oakley Creek to Aoana, and how just sensational that project is, and how it's been embraced by the community and brought in so many other well-beings and benefits when we've taken that approach that is aligned with the water strategy. And just the other thing I just wanted to mention why this work is so vital is because of the reforms that are coming at us with pace, whether we like it or not, around the RMA reform, but of course the Three Waters reform. And it's really essential that we have this water strategy in place so that we can set the direction for the new entity and really be leading them and setting this high standard that we expect, and the approach that we're going to take going forward when there's going to be more players, and we really want to still step up in our role regardless of whatever structure happens in the future. So I think that is all of the comments that I wanted to make in supporting this and acknowledgements. I hope that I have covered everybody. Apologies if I've missed anybody. There is still an opportunity for anyone to jump in to make a comment if there's anyone that I need to that I'd like that should be acknowledged for the water strategy framework, which is still obviously an ongoing process and going to come back to us. So it's important to highlight that this is only part of the journey. We're not quite there yet. So I don't want to sound too celebratory. Still lots of mahi to do. I just wondered, Councillor Filipina, could I invite you to perhaps wrap up this whakaaro? As I see your comment there, and it's perhaps best if you would like to talk to it, and then I will put it.
Aroha mai chair, I'll leave it as the side, but I didn't want to take up the time because you have said what you've acknowledged. So ngā mihi ki a koe.
Tēnā koe, mātua. So on that basis, I would be delighted to put that we adopt the water strategy framework. So can I just, there we go, and just the in terms of what the framework consists of, and that we endorse Appendix A and just note there around the follow-up that's going to happen. So I will put that. All those in favour, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
To the contrary, no. Kua mana. Carried unanimously. Ngā mihi ki a koutou. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate that piece of work.